Rachel. I'm so thankful that you are here with us for our homeschool chats. Thank you for joining us. I want you just to dive in before we get started to like our meaty conversation that I'm excited to have, and tell everyone who you are. Like, what do you do, and tell us about your homeschool experiences and all of those things.
All right. I am Rachel. I am a second generation homeschooler. So I was homeschooled my entire life from preschool up through high school graduation before I went to college. And I got married in college. And promptly after college, I moved overseas with my husband. And we've been living in Asia ever since then. And I'm now raising two boys. And we are raising them bilingual in Spanish and English. My husband is a native Spanish speaker, so we're really trying to include their heritage in our lives, even though we don't live in a place where we have a Spanish-speaking community here in Asia. So we have that element, but I'm raising my two sons. I'm still very close to my family. I come from the classic huge homeschooling family. I'm the oldest of 8 kids, and we live in the same city with my parents, and my 2 youngest sisters are still at home. We have quite an age spread between 8 kids. So they're still being homeschooled, and I get to see them several times a week and go over their papers with them and do some school with them as well. So I love it that I get a taste of like high school homeschooling and preschool homeschooling all at the same time.
That's so fun. That's so fun. I didn't realize that your family lived there with you as well. That's very cool. So tell us about your YouTube channel. Like, I found you on YouTube, just so people are kind of give the little backstory. I found you on YouTube just because every once in a while on a Saturday night, I will search YouTube for gentle classical reviews, because I'm like, what are people saying about me and about what our stuff? And so I found yours, and they were like so thorough, and you explained so much of it the way I would have explained it. And so I was like, became a quick follower and binge all your content, like even stuff that has nothing to do with gentle classical. I enjoy to watch it, and I love to hear you talk about homeschooling. I can tell that you very much love it. You're very passionate about it, which as a first generation homeschool mom makes me super excited to know that like it is possible that I've not ruined this for my children, and that they too will want to be homeschoolers. Yes, it is possible. So how did you get started with that, and why do you do that?
So yes, first of all, I definitely am a bit of a gentle and classical fangirl, and I have made multiple videos on multiple of the resources. So it definitely pops up on my channel from time to time. My YouTube channel is called 7 in All, and the channel existed for a while, and it was initially a siblings channel, which is why it was called 7 in All, and we were just making random videos together. Like this was when we were quite young. But then in 2020, I decided to resurrect the channel because we were on very strict lockdowns where we live. So we had times when there were 60 days in a row where I couldn't even go outside the house, and I had a toddler and a baby. We couldn't leave our apartment. We couldn't go outdoors for fresh air. So we were like the rest of the world, we were in a very crazy time and season of life, and decided in the midst of that to start making YouTube videos. And there was a lot of interest in homeschooling at that time, I realized. And living overseas, we have a fairly minimalist lifestyle, but one thing we have a lot of is homeschool stuff. That's one of our great priorities, one of our great passions. And it's one of the things I'm very knowledgeable about to be able to talk about. So I somehow stumbled into homeschool YouTube and just joined the crew and started making homeschool videos where I watched a lot of homeschool review videos, and sometimes I felt like there's not enough info here for me to really understand. So my videos do tend to be a little bit long sometimes because I'm really trying to give a full picture of whatever I'm talking about. So that's one of the shortcomings on YouTube, where people like more short form content. Depends on your preference, but I really love to give the very detailed looks at curriculum, as well as I do a lot of non-curriculum related videos as well, just talking about homeschool life and sharing some different kind of perspectives, because we have had a rather unusual homeschool experience with being overseas and with homeschooling since way before all of the publicity it has had in recent years. So that's how it started.
That's awesome. So I saw yesterday, I think in your Instagram videos, that you were doing a day in the life and that you had some wildlife come to visit you. Did you like abandon the house when that happened? Because that would have been, I would have ran.
So that day in the life will be releasing sometime. But we actually had a rat in the house first thing in the morning. And then we had a snake in the house in the evening. And yes, I did abandon the house when the snake came.
Yeah.
Our next door neighbor has had a king cobra in their house before. So I was just like, I don't know enough about snakes. I'm leaving. I'm going to wait till my husband gets home. He not a venomous snake. But still, I'm just like, I'm not the outdoorsy kind of person that's okay with snakes in the house.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And I am pretty outdoorsy, and I don't mind to see a snake as long as there's a certain distance from me and out of doors. But I draw the line at it coming inside of my house. So I feel like that was a very justified thing. Okay, so you had this great question. What do you believe is more important than curriculum for successful, joyful homeschool? And I think as a second generation homeschooler, your answer to this will be very informative because you have the opportunity to not look back on what you wish, maybe your education had been, but look back on what it was as a homeschooler and take from that, which is more, I think, informative than like I can look back and say, well, this is what we did in public school, and I maybe wish that it had been this way. And then so I do that experiment on my children. Your mom already experimented on you. And so what is the most important thing to you?
To me, what's much more core is the family relationships and the relational skills in your homeschool. I've been in the homeschool world for 30 years. It's been my life. This has been my community the whole time. I've seen homeschool fail, and I've seen homeschoolers have to walk away from homeschool, and I've seen homeschool and the homeschool experience be very damaging and scarring on families. In those cases, it was not because of the curriculum. It was because of toxic family relationships. It was because of poor methods of communication, poor methods of interacting. When I talk to moms who are just struggling with no joy in their homeschools, it's generally because between children and parent, they cannot have respectful communication, or between just siblings and siblings, they can't communicate respectfully. It tends to be these types of issues where the underlying values of treating all of the people in our family with respect, valuing all of the people in our family. We need to have those values and those habits in place before we can even really begin to find joy and success in our homeschool. So that is something I'm very passionate about, because when I was homeschooled, we did not have all of these beautiful homeschooling options. We did not have the best books. We did not have fun YouTube videos to throw in to make a lesson more exciting. What we had was very simple and basic, but it was the most amazing experience. And it was because we had that core of strong family connections, strong family relationships, and respect built from the very beginning. And I know that not all families have that, and some will have to work harder toward it. It's worth working towards.
Yes. And as you were talking, it made me think about how sometimes when someone's struggling in their marriage, they think that maybe having a child will bring them together. And I think that could probably be a good metaphor for homeschooling. Being together more is going to amplify the issue because there's never a break from it. As a homeschool mother, I get to see all of my sin manifest in my children back at me. And it takes so much humility. You are constantly dying to yourself because you have to be willing to say, they're behaving that way. And then this isn't 100% true. Our children are their own unique people. But a lot of times what we're seeing play out in them that's ugly or unkind or harsh or any of those things is really a reflection of how we're speaking, either, you know, in our bad moments or even routinely in treating one
Mhm.
another. So it's a very, you know, you don't have to have had a perfect upbringing to be a successful
Mhm.
homeschooler. I will, you know, throw that caveat
Mhm.
in. Obviously, like,
Yeah.
I did not grow up in a home where anyone spoke respectfully, really, at any point to anyone. And it was very
Mhm.
harsh, and it was not a believing home. And anger was really the most appropriate emotion for all situations. But when you grow up in an unhealthy family environment like that, not to say that it was all bad, obviously had very good things as well, but there was a lot of that harshness that
Mhm.
you have to be willing to, like, when you see that cropping up,
Mhm.
say, like, I know the root of that, and that is in I'm teaching that through my behavior. I didn't intend to teach it. I don't want to teach it. But a lot of us default to that, kind of like how we were raised in the moments of
Mhm.
stress. That's how that comes out. And so it is a magnifying glass. It is a
Mhm.
friend of mine, Haley, she calls it, like, I think this is a quote she got, but it's a pressure cooker of sin
Mhm.
and emotions and just habits and stuff.
Yeah.
So that
Mhm.
is a very good point. And I also really don't think that that's talked about enough. Like, we do
Mhm.
focus on that.
Because what is searchable is the curriculum titles and what is that's what gets clicked on and everything. But to, like, we do talk about that, it's helpful, but ultimately it's like there is no curriculum that will fix what's hurting most. Like there can be, I love to talk details of curriculum, but that's not what's at the core. And also, I see homeschool and using curriculum as an opportunity to work on these relationship skills. And I really encourage moms to do that, because there can be this idea of dichotomy. I have to choose relationship or choose math. And I'm like, no, while we're doing math, we're working on relationship skills. We can work on perseverance, and we get a glimpse at ourselves and our character and our children's character and what to work on. Am I patient in this math lesson? Is my child patient in this math lesson? How are we showing perseverance? How are we showing how we handle frustration? So, in whatever subject it might be, I actually see those as opportunities to build those skills and to build character. Even just in these, like, to me, they seem like safe opportunities. They're not out in the real world in like really high stakes. It's just a math lesson. So we can begin to practice and stretch these muscles and grow.
I love that. I love that so much. And because I can testify as someone that was like, I went to a public school and have never been by nature a patient. I think there are people that are just by nature very patient people. I am the least of that. But I have had, especially with having multiple kids with learning disabilities, like,
Mhm.
that is a it is a difficult thing, but it is also a grace in my life because it has helped me to have to learn how to die to myself. Like, I
Mhm.
was a quick learner, show me something one time, and then I just know that thing. Like, I just learned everything very quickly. And so to have children that need to learn the same thing like 100 times in a row before it's permanently in their mind is just like, I would have thought that's not even possible, but it definitely is.
It
And
is very.
yeah, and that is what a learning disability is. And so
Mhm.
just needing to sit down and do that same thing over and over and over again. And, and then sometimes fail at being patient and then show them repentance. And, even on my best day, mommy has to still repent. So it's also beautiful for discipleship as well, if we can remember to bring it back to that.
Yes.
This is probably a conversation that needs to be had like many, 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 many times because you're right. There are a lot of homeschool families that they're having, a lot of times they may even pull their child from school because of
Mhm.
a behavioral issue. And I'm
Mhm.
not saying that homeschool cannot be the solution to that, but
Mhm.
homeschooling alone, like just
Mhm.
the idea of homeschooling, using a curriculum at home is not the solution to that. The solution
Mhm.
is going to be all that God can do in the midst of this new relationship that is being founded by homeschooling.
Yep.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, like, you're like, "I'm passionate about this," and I'm like, "Apparently I am too, and I've not thought
Yeah,
about I've not given that nearly as much thought as I should have." Okay.
great topic.
Yeah, it's a new topic. Let's go. We could probably talk for an hour. Okay. What about foreign language for your children? I know you guys live in Asia, and so you have a unique opportunity for like immersive type language learning.
Mhm.
I would love to hear like how that works out for you guys in the situation and the dynamic that you have, but also some kind of applicable advice that you might have for those of us that are not, in any type of like language diversity around us at all.
Mhm. Yes, I do think that my um, linguistically diverse living situation influences my opinions for sure. And happening to marry someone who I met in Michigan who did not have the same native language that I did definitely influenced how I feel about that. But also just languages influence that. I did not learn any languages as a kid. I started learning language during my college studies. I studied 3 different languages at the college level. I absolutely loved it. I fell in love with just the science of language, the beauty and art of different languages. So that's kind of where the love for language first started. And I've had many opportunities to use languages since we moved back to Asia. I speak Mandarin Chinese. I've been able to use that. That's probably my strongest second language and a language I very, very much love. But since starting my YouTube channel, I've really tried to recommend or push every once in a while that homeschoolers not so much consider language as something to just introduce at the high school level, because we see it as a required credit for high school. So we think, okay, the best time to teach a foreign language is high school. But kids learn languages so well. Little kids learn languages so well. So I just, even for families who feel like they don't have any opportunities to use a language, I suspect that there might be more opportunities than you think there are when you really start looking around you. I do know America tends to be a very English dominated community. Yes, for sure. But there are a lot of languages present around you, most likely, even when you don't notice them. In every state, like I didn't know this until I married a Mexican man, but every state we've ever visited, he has found the Mexican mall in whatever city we're in. And we've gone to the Mexican mall, which is a whole community with all the food and all the desserts and the special shops and the carniceria, the butcher and the bakery, everything. Like he finds it wherever we go in any state that we've been in. And we've been in a lot of states. So it definitely exists. The diversity of language and the diversity of cultures does very much exist in the US and around the world when you have your eyes open for it. And to me, I see language learning as a way of loving our neighbor, as a means to loving our neighbor.
Yes.
So it is definitely a passion for me. So we do, as a multicultural, bicultural family, we do put more effort into language learning than other families naturally would with having mom and dad from 2 different cultures. But I do believe that any family can put in, at least some effort to building a foundation and an idea that, hey, it's not so hard to pronounce a Spanish word correctly. It's not so hard to pronounce a Chinese name correctly. And these simple things that we can do to love our neighbors. And yeah, kids pick up languages like that. I wish I had started learning languages as a child.
You would know 10, I think.
Yeah, probably. I would have just kept going. It was love at first Mandarin lesson for me, and I never looked back.
Do you think for English speakers that Spanish is probably the easiest foreign language to start with if mom knows no other language herself?
I think that Spanish, like when looking at homeschool resources, Spanish probably has the vast majority of the easy to use resources that are designed for parents to use without any knowledge. And also in the US, many libraries have Spanish book sections. It's so easy to access Spanish music on YouTube. There's really, really good YouTube, I find them on YouTube, but they're actually musicians that create really nice, clean, educational Spanish music for kids, which is absolutely fantastic. So I feel like if you really don't know what language to choose, that's a very good one, because there is such a huge Spanish speaking country across the United States, or Spanish speaking community, across the United States. But I love the Mandarin language. And actually, I've known a lot of homeschoolers who have chosen to study it just because it captures their interest for some reason. It's a beautiful language, and the grammar is much easier than Spanish. Yes, you might have to learn a few thousand characters, but the grammar is easy.
So that's interesting to know. I knew that there were so many characters that I assumed that every other aspect of the language was also complex.
It's not equally complex. The grammar is very straightforward. I love you can get started speaking very easily in Chinese. Reading will take you a while.
Yeah, interesting. That's interesting to know. You've piqued my interest on that. So did you ever, so for those of us that love classical education, did you ever do Latin or take Latin or learn Latin when you were being homeschooled? And do you think that has impacted your ability to learn other languages at all?
I did. I was the only kid in my family that took Latin as a kid, because I was the only kid in my family that my mom could never get enough schoolwork for. So she just was like, okay, here's Latin. I enjoyed Latin well enough. I don't think I continued it for, typically with Latin, you have to continue it for a pretty significant quantity of time, because I was in elementary age when I did it. You have to continue for a pretty long quantity of time for it to really have a very big impact. So I don't really credit my love for languages to Latin personally.
Okay. I was just curious.
I hated it all. I did like it, but I think it was really, I had some fantastic college professors, and then fell in love with a boy who spoke Spanish. So
yeah, that helps. The whole love thing with someone who speaks Spanish, that helps facilitate the desire to speak the language for sure. Well, my observations, and this is just like my own personal experience, was I never took Latin or Greek in school, but part of how I learned to sight read before I went to school. And part of that for me was recognizing root words. And so I've always loved words. It's like why I write anything. And I love finding new words, but kind of already kind of figuring out what does that mean based on the roots that I recognize. And so when my younger daughter that has dyslexia was doing, she was in upper elementary school, we did Latin. And to begin with, I was like, why would we do Latin with someone that struggles so much with English? Well, I'm certainly not going to add, but it actually helped. And the grammar of Latin helped her understand English grammar better than English grammar helped her understand English grammar. I guess being a little bit removed from it made it make more sense versus these words she's just used to. And so I learned French in high school. And I say learned, high school level French, that was it. But that's what I've chosen to go with my boys, because I became familiar with the pronunciation of the words. But in looking at it does, but in looking at Spanish resources, I can see so many similarities. So I feel like understanding Latin roots has helped me. Maybe not to I don't even speak English all that well, so I do not sound good speaking French or Spanish, but being able to read it or understand signage and stuff, they all have so many similarities and overlaps that beginning to learn French has helped me with Spanish significantly. And so I think that's important that no matter what language you may have taken in high school for a year or two, even if you don't think that you remember it, it will help you, especially if it's a romantic language. If you're kind of stay in that same genre of stuff, of languages, then I feel like it's helpful.
Oh, yes.
Kind of that same foundation, just a little bit.
I think learning just about any language, even languages that are vastly different, help you to understand your own language better just through the comparison and contrast. It's all that same type of functioning, but the differences are so cool, so fascinating. It's a really fascinating subject. And I like that it's a subject that can so easily be a skill, because it's very easy for us to think, oh, our kids will never need to use this language. And then they go to college in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and literally marry a guy who speaks Spanish. You do not know what God has in store for you. kids. You don't know. So be a little bit open. We can always be a little bit open to those things rather than think, oh, this is useless. You'll never use another language. You never know. You might.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Another great question that you had on here is teaching kids about the history of the Bible. So tell me a little bit about your passion for that subject.
All right. This also kind of goes back to college. I was a tutor for Bible classes. And when I was a tutor for Bible classes, a lot of my students, I noticed how much frustration they had as they first bumped into some of the scholarly ideas of how the Bible came to be through the oral histories of the Hebrew people and through the writings and recordings, and then how the Bible books were chosen to be extremely frustrating. And I realized it was because they were Christian kids. They'd been raised in the Christian church their whole life, but they had never really been taught any idea of where the Bible came from. They just had a vague idea. It was inspired by God. It's the word of God. So to suddenly be shocked with these ideas of that there were decisions made in which books became part of the canon and all of these things, it was a hit to their faith. Yeah. And that was kind of where it started, and it just stayed as a seed for a long time. My dad became very, very interested in Bible history and was collecting all of these like 400-page books on the history of how we got the Bible that were, some of them were very boring. But I decided I wanted to write a resource so that people could teach their kids about this, so that kids wouldn't grow up and be shocked that the Bible didn't just appear on earth. Right. Because sometimes as parents, we think our kids understand something, but we just kind of made that assumption and we don't realize, oh, they don't actually have a solid idea of what does inspired by God mean and how did we get the Bible? So based on some of those books, some of which were very interesting and some of which were a little bit boring, but they weren't really child-friendly level, I worked on creating a study that it's kind of weird because we're used to studying history in like periods or countries. And I was like, I'm going to write the history of a book, the greatest book of all time, the history from the very beginnings, the oral histories up until today, and what's happening in Bible translation around the world today. And following the story of the Bible throughout time. And I think that for kids to understand where the Bible came from will help them a lot, so that later when they grow up, they don't feel kind of lied to, that it's like, hey, I just thought this was the inspired word of God and I didn't know anything else. Some of the misunderstandings that you can see where people get very, very like, oh no, you can only read the Bible in English. We can't be reading the Bible in other languages, which those are some issues that come up. And I think can be traced back to a misunderstanding of where we got the Bible. But I also think it just helps us to appreciate the word more when we see how people fought for it throughout history, how people fought to get the word into people's hands. And it helps us to appreciate the access we have today that most believers through most of history did not have.
Yes. Yes.
So I think we always teach what's in the Bible, but I also think it's important to teach our kids, how did we get the Bible in the first place? What are the stories of the people that fought to bring it to us? What are the technological advances that made it possible to bring the Bible to us? But not only to us, it's an ongoing story. There are still people around the world that don't have Bible access, and what's being done about that by the church. So I created that resource about 2 years ago, and we have that available on my website. Where'd you learn that? It's called The Bible's Story, tracing the history of the English Bible. It is specifically the English Bible, but it's all, the same story up until they start translating it into English in relatively modern history.
So where can people find that? What's your website?
My website is www.where'dyoulearnthat.com.
Where'dyoulearnthat.com. Okay, we'll make sure to have that like in the profile down below, the description down below, so that everybody can find that. I did not know that you had that resource. So I'm like, okay, well, I want this. I want to read that. I want to read that to my kids. Do you have a favorite early, like preschool, elementary aged Bible that you have a preference for with your kids?
This tends to be my son's favorite. This is the Kenneth Taylor Family Time Bible in Pictures. The pictures tend to be very dramatic and realistic. And I have boys, and they like dramatic.
Yeah, as I see that, like we started with, oh gosh, it's the one that everybody uses, and I've just had a totally Sally Lloyd Jones,
Jesus Storybook.
The Jesus Storybook. Yeah, and that's very, very, very preschool, very young age. And we've moved to now the Alfred Rex Storybook Bible. And I love that Bible so much, but this looks almost like it might be a between level.
It is a preschool kindergarten type level. The Family Time Bible in Pictures. It's an old one, but mostly my boys really like those dramatic and realistic pictures of
like especially the war one. Yes.
Samson wrestling with a lion.
Yeah, and that looks like it has a little bit more text than the Jesus Storybook Bible. So it may be like a little bit of a notch above it for attention span wise, as far as text on each page. I get that question a lot, like which Bible do we recommend? And so it's hard when you haven't read all of them to have an opinion. So I love to hear about another, one that I haven't seen before. So I have 3 questions that I've been closing out our interviews with that are a little fun, little make you think. Okay, if you could read one book for the rest of your life that is not the Bible, like this was your only book that you had access to and you had to read it over and over and over again, what would it be? I feel physically uncomfortable this question makes everyone that I ask.
I feel like that's like the worst possible decision to have to make because I want to read lots of books for the rest of my life. Lots and lots of ones. Well, I'm kind of torn because the things you might think, oh, you want a really thick book so that you have a lot to read. But then it's also like, well, maybe you just want a kind of a comfort read. So like something that you've gone back to again and again and have really enjoyed.
Yeah. I've also had people go with like volumes, like I have, I'm not sure that this would be my pick, but I have all of Narnia in one big volume. So I wouldn't have to pick just one singular book. I could have the whole collection, So I think I would have Charlotte Mason's volumes, like all smushed into one book, if that was possible.
One giant.
Yeah, like this big, all of her writings, everything Charlotte Mason ever wrote, because she writes about so many different things. She doesn't just write about education. And so I could read that a lot over and over again.
Well, if we could cheat like that and just have like a compilation of C.S. Lewis writings, that would probably be my number one, because I can go back and read his letters and the Abolition of Man and Screw Tape and all of the many, many like.
I have a collection that has 7 of his books in it, and it's nice and thick, but I have it, so it definitely counts. Yes. Okay, so if you could tell your brand new mom self something, go back to when you're holding that first baby in your arms, and it could be about parenting or it could be about homeschooling, whatever, like what would you tell yourself at that stage?
I would say, don't ever feel guilty about asking your mom for help. And really specifically thinking back to when my first son was born, I had extremely serious postpartum complications and almost died. And what I mainly felt was guilt. I felt guilty that my mom was taking care of my baby.
Oh my goodness.
And now, in a more sane state of mind, I realized that was ridiculous. She wasn't dying. She was fine. She could take care of it. But that was one. And in general, even when you're not dying, if you have some community, if you have some family member or community that offers their help, don't feel guilty about that. Like if they're offering and if they're a good, positive part of your life like that, that's not a shame. That's a blessing.
Yes.
We shouldn't be thinking we have to do it all. And I'm very blessed. I'm very blessed to have a family that is very communal and we help each other. And I'm grateful for that. But I do remember that strong feeling of feeling like, no, I should be able to do this.
think that
And
kind of is, and I just had this conversation the other day about that's almost an American cultural expectation
it is.
that
It
we,
is.
yeah, that we feel like we have to do everything ourselves, that like being pregnant and having a baby should be like not even interruptive. Like we should just completely maintain status quo through all of those things. It doesn't matter how little sleep you're getting, none of that matters. We should be able to just get it done anyway. And I don't think anyone else on the planet lives that way, except for maybe some European countries, but like not even them. It's like an American idea. And it is so destructive
Mhm.
to American motherhood because it makes it so much more difficult than it has to be. And that makes it
Absolutely.
so unappealing to young
Mhm.
women that see other people in their lives that are like suffering with mental health issues or just sheer exhaustion and burnout and like, we're going 10 ways at once. We can't hold an adult conversation because we haven't slept in 4 years because we are not asking for help. So I bet
Mhm.
you can definitely see that cultural
Oh,
difference.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Here basically the very, very strongly held rule is mother and baby will not go outside for 30 days after the
Mhm.
baby is born. And I was so sick after my first son that was all a blur. But with my second son, I actually practiced that and I felt more confident and I had my mom to take care of my toddler. So
Mhm.
I could just be more traditional with what they do here. And I just stayed in bed with my baby for basically a month, which sounds absolutely horrible, I feel like, to the American perspective. But
That
it
sounds
was the
amazing.
sweetest time. It was that one was I was so able to treasure it. And I'm so grateful that I did that.
That is
And was able
wonderful.
to have
I think that alone also could be a whole conversation. Okay.
yeah,
The
so
last
many.
one is very, very light. What is your favorite beverage?
I like sweet iced tea.
Sweet, just sweet tea. Yeah.
Sweet tea. Sweet tea. But I've hardly ever lived in the South. So but I still like it. We have a
Yeah.
really
Here,
strong sweet tea here that's so good.
yeah. Oh, that's cool. So it's not just the South that drinks
Mhm,
sweet. Because I mean, when we go somewhere, if we say I want a glass of tea, that it is
mhm,
by default sweet tea. And
mhm.
like people that are not from the South will come here and they'll order tea and they get a big glass of sugar water and they're like, "What is this?" Like here you have to specify, I want unsweet tea. So I love that. Okay. Well, cool. Well, thank you, Rachel. This was so fun. I feel like we probably could have several more conversations along all of these veins just to like dig in a little bit deeper. But if you guys want to hear more from Rachel, make sure to follow her on YouTube at Seven and All. And I
Mhm.
will link her website and all the other ways you can find her on Instagram and all those things in the show notes below. So thank you, Rachel, again for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. That was really fun.